So to preface this story, I was about 15 or 16 years old at the time this happened. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero. Overall, just stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So, at this get-together, there were 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid young teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it may be dangerous since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyway, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, it's a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are one person is it. The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls Grounders while they're on the ground, then they count as tagged. Yeah, it's a pretty childish game, but it's very fun. After a few rounds though, we got very bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought could be something like rocks. Something hitting the chain-link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group up. I looked over at my best friend to ask if she had heard that, and everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. She asked me what I meant, and when I told her it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us, she responded with the classical, "Ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I also have very good intuition, and something about this situation just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, I obsessively stared down at the area behind it, which was all woods beside the houses on the left and right of the playground, in paranoia. It was then that I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just the headlight of a car that was coming down the street that connected to the street of the park, since you can vaguely see the headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized that there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me as we all snapped our heads over in that direction. Coming up along the side of the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some white baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone, but an actual light. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was quite strange, since he seemed, a guess from his clothes, to be at least mid-20s. He had just come out of the woods by himself to sit there and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, though, we agreed that perhaps he was just waiting for a ride, or maybe just resting for a moment. We tried to brush the fact he was sitting and so intensely staring at us off. However, we started to take note that after just a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of Grounders, this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to our group. He went from sitting on the one swing furthest away to the next swing a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was only about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he just sat there watching. At this point, all of us had noticed the strange man attempting to get closer, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs on the side furthest away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, though, I kept my eyes glued to his figure. As we neared the end of the street, he suddenly stood up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping a bit of distance away. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continued to follow us instead of going the other way, Then I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stayed hot on our heels, but not only following which turn we took, he also started sprinting toward us, screaming, "You motherfuckers! I'm going to fucking kill you!" At this point, the whole group burst out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was ushering each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was until I could hear my best friend struggling to keep up. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her, so I ran back to her side and grabbed her hand, quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, come on, we have to go now." This whole time, the man was still running and screaming behind us, catching up very quickly. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand on either side and running at a pace she could still keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if even that much. As we all piled in through her garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound fully grown German shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after him. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark lamp-lit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake for defense. But most comforting, our big fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. This happened about 5 years ago. I was around 16 to 17 years old. I always enjoyed walking though. I would spend at least 1 hour a day walking the roads around where I lived. Well, one day I was out doing my normal route, walking down my street that my house was on, taking a right to the main street and following it until I got to the end. There I would cross the crosswalk and retrace my steps to head home. On this particular day, I was about 20 feet from where I would leave the main road on my journey back home. I had my headphones deep in, blasting music as always. This can be a bad habit as I am a young female that's been put in some sketchy situations while going for my night walks. Men chasing me, people following me, etc. But since this was broad daylight and the roads were pretty busy, I figured I would be completely safe. But man, was I ever off with that assumption, as I was just about to pass the entrance of a side street before leaving the main road. This black Ford F-150 pulled up beside me. He stopped for a moment and gestured for me to walk in front of him, so I did so. I was about to go on my merry way when I barely heard someone trying to talk to me. I turned down my music, taking out my headphones as I looked to see the man in the black Ford still stopped at the entrance of the side road. I looked at him, puzzled and trying to figure out if he was talking to me. I pointed at myself in confusion, and he grinned, nodding. "What's a beautiful girl like you doing out here?" he asked. Walking?" I replied, laughing awkwardly, seeing as the answer should have been obvious. "It's quite a beautiful day for that," he commented, just seeming to make small talk. I vaguely agreed before going to turn around and continue my route home. "Wait!" the man called. I stopped and turned around, trying to be polite. Even though the encounter was odd, I didn't see too many red flags yet. The man then went off on a tangent, saying things such as, "You're so beautiful, you have a really nice body. This hot weather is nice for a hot girl." I grew uncomfortable at this point, seeing as this man had to be well into his mid-40s. He had a bit of receding hairline with black hair, a nose with a protruding bridge, blue eyes that were surrounded by wrinkles, and was dressed in a dress shirt. I instantly brought up my age by saying, "I'm a minor." There's been multiple times I've been mistaken for being older than I was. I was hoping saying this would get this fully grown adult-ass man to back off. But instead, he said, "Oh, that's okay. Come on, sweetheart, get in the truck." That's when I started panicking. Red flags shooting up everywhere. Stranger danger. I laughed nervously, looking at the cars around me to see if anyone was noticing what was happening. Nobody did, though. "No, that's fine, my house isn't far." "No, really. Get in the truck. I'll bring you home." "No." "Come on, just get in here with me." I turned and started walking briskly away. I was hoping he'd just drive off somewhere else, but instead he drove following me, trying to pressure me into his truck. I thought fast of multiple options for different scenarios, but I chose a simple one. I pulled out my phone while still walking, lifted it up to my ear, and pretended to loudly call someone. "Hey, Dad, yeah, no, I'm on this street right here. I'll be home in about 10 minutes. I stopped, pretending to listen to a reply. "Okay, you're outside waiting for me? Awesome, yeah, we can do that when I get back. Love you too." After he heard me say that, he took off, his tires screeching all the way. I ran back home and made it back within about 6 minutes, actually calling my dad on the way, who had made a call to the police, who showed up shortly after and took my statement and description of the man. It turns out that that man was on the loose in my area, exposing himself to minors and trying to pick them up on the side of roads for sexual acts, but they never actually found out specifically who the man was. When my friend and I met the woman we now refer to as the Banshee, it was around 10 p.m. at night. We were walking back from this milk tea place, and we were maybe at a mile 5 of a 6-mile total round trip. In other words, we were almost home. We were walking on a long stretch of sidewalk next to a wide road that's very busy during the day but almost completely empty at night. For a little bit of background, my hiking buddy and I sometimes go for long walks through town at night when we can't get out to trails during the day. It is quite dark, but our routes go through a fairly safe blend of residential and shopping areas. Usually we head to some sort of late-night restaurant or a food truck. We talk, stop for a food and a drink, and then head back on our way. We were wearing these glowing battery-powered vests and reflective items to make sure traffic saw us. We had had some too close encounters with distracted drivers before. We've also had a few encounters with strange people when out on our walks. This woman didn't start making strange noises at first. It was a long stretch of straight sidewalk, and we had seen her coming for a long time before she started that. No one else was out walking along the road at this hour. There were plenty of street lights, and she'd appear underneath the lights, then disappear in some shadow of bushes and trees, then reappear closer to us. We were glowing in our vests in addition to the streetlights, so she had to have seen us coming along too. I figured she must have worked at one of the shops or restaurants nearby and was just getting done with closing up. Must just be trying to get home, just like we were. That was until she started making these weird, random noises. At first, the sounds were like an odd, hacking noise, like she was attempting to clear her throat as noisily as possible. But this seemed to be just a warm-up. The sound changed into something like a cross between a crow cawing and a small dog's bark. Rendering it in text is hard, but the closest thing might be something like "grah, grah." So we kept walking towards her, warily watching and listening, thinking perhaps she might have a disability or some other sort of issue. She looked decently dressed and walked steadily and deliberately, not like someone on drugs. If not for her strange noises, she seemed completely normal. Then she started making these loud, low-pitched groaning sounds. It had us briefly making zombie movie references to each other, joking for a bit. But we speculated maybe she was talking to someone on earbuds or making an attempt to sing or something. It got weirder as she added some higher-pitched screechy sounds, like some angry cockatoo. At this point, she was less than 2 blocks away, rotating through these bizarre sounds, with short pauses of silence in between. She looked just like someone's cute little grandma. Didn't look anything like you'd expect to see someone making those sounds. She was wearing this old-fashioned thick shirt, a cardigan and clunky-looking shoes, carrying a single cloth shopping bag. Her hair was a short, curly old lady perm. Honestly, she looked kind of adorable, but she started making even more crazy sounds. She was getting closer, her bizarre noises getting more unsettling. I realized that I couldn't quite see what she was clutching in her other hand, the one that didn't have a shopping bag. She looked harmless, but this was getting too strange. My buddy looked at me and asked, "Time to cross?" echoing my own thoughts. We didn't want a confrontation with this woman. I nodded, but just before we stepped out into the road, the old lady seemed to have the same idea. She suddenly veered off the sidewalk into the road, making a steady diagonal line toward the other side. There was no traffic on the road at this point, so I wasn't too worried about that. I relaxed a bit, continuing on. I figured she was avoiding us, just like we were trying to avoid her. But just as we started to pass her, she suddenly let out a loud scream and rushed at us from the middle of the road. Her mouth was wide open as she charged at us, just shrieking into the night. We stepped quickly apart, and her abrupt rush took her right between us, just shriek-wailing that horrible sound. It sounded like it hurt her throat a lot. Banshee-like is the only word I have for it. We were several feet apart, both braced for her to come back and do something. But instead, she veered again and went down the sidewalk the way she had originally been going. As she walked away, she stared back at us, keeping up these short bursts of that shrieking banshee noise, stopping to take deep breaths. As she got further away from us, she started cawing to us again too. We stood there for a while, silently watching, until she was a good long ways off down the sidewalk, her very strange screams fading into the distance. I still have no idea what was wrong with her. Did our lights trigger an episode or something? Honestly, I hope she's okay. She seemed to know where she was going, but I'd rather not take the chance and meet again. For context, I'm a 24-year-old female and live in a very populated city where people drive around a lot. I'm still shaken up by this, and I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts. The other night, I parked my car outside, went to let my dog in the house, and went back out to get my stuff. Note, it was about 6 p.m., but it was completely dark out because of the winter. I got in my driver's seat and locked the car. I was sitting there for about a minute or so getting my stuff together, when all of a sudden, I see a man walk from in front of my car to the driver's side window. He was holding something up to my window, and I automatically got extremely panicked. A few months ago, a man had held a wrench up to my window in a grocery store parking lot where I was sitting with my roommate and I. He saw my dog and ran away though. It was a sketchy situation then, and it was a sketchy situation now as well. The next few steps are a bit blurry. I was staring at him in a panic. He was motioning for me to roll my window down. I looked into the back of my car to see if my dog was there to protect me, only to realize she was not, as I had just let her into the house. I do realize that I had the back windows both 75% open. Then a thought popped into my mind. I can drive away. My car is still on. I shifted my car into drive. He reached back onto either the window, the door, the side of the car, I don't know. I started to drive though, and he backed up. I pulled into the street and almost hit another car, and ended up pulling out and leaving, shaking. The next day I realized my landlord had a camera pointed at the front of the house to see if packages would get stolen. I asked if he had any clips from that time the night before, and he did. Too bad it's motion censored though, so it only shows the moment my car is pulling out. Turns out that after I left, he walked away from where my car was. He had this huge plank or something in his hands hidden behind his back. It was at least 3 foot long. He then walked down one way of the street a little bit, then turned around and went the other way. I wish I didn't even see that video, because I was scared before and thought maybe I was overreacting, but now I know he was holding on to a weapon. I'm very thankful I trusted my instincts. Someone on a neighborhood website that night said their car got stolen 2 streets over, so maybe that's what he wanted with me. Anyways, I'd rather not find out. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run two other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. This video has been graciously sponsored by Hunter Killer. Hunter Killer is an engaging and addictive subscription box service where you get to be a detective. There's been a murder and it's up to you and your team to solve it. This involves sifting through piles of documents, evidence, audio recordings and case files, eliminating suspects as you go along until you crack the case and catch the killer. It's a fully immersive experience with a very high attention to detail that makes it all the more fun, and so that it feels real. It's definitely the kind of game that you can play with your partner, friends, or family. My wife and I received our box last week and we were absolutely addicted to trying to solve the mystery. We stayed up late 3 nights in a row, and I can honestly say this was the most fun we've had during quarantine, and have already signed up for more. We are itching to receive the next part of the mystery, and I'm sure that once you've played, you will be too. So follow the link in the description and punch in the code MORTIS to get a discount on your first box. You won't regret it. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened to me and the man I was dating back in the late spring of the year 2000. I'm an avid and experienced urban explorer. I have visited many different abandoned sites. The place I'm telling you about now has been explored several times by others since, but when I visited, it wasn't a common knowledge location, and all the buildings were still intact, except for the main house, which had, from what I had heard, burned, leaving nothing but the outer stone wall. Nothing but the outer wall remains. All the other buildings were torn down since I was there. To more recent urban explorers, it's known as the Stone Castle, and more recently, the Ulster Castle. This is the name given by the Heritage Society that decided to fix it up. When my boyfriend at the time discovered it, he saw it in the distance from a roof he was working on in Oro, Medonte. There was, but not anymore, a large barn, a carriage house, and towards the back of the property a stable. The first weekend we both had off together, we made the hour drive to explore it. The property was absolutely stunning. On the top of a hill back from the road, you could almost imagine living surrounded by such beauty. And we did exactly that. The house itself was gone except for the wall, and if you looked into the basement window, you could see an old stove laying among the wreckage. You could tell it had been a beautiful home at some point to whoever owned it. Being the explorer I was, I insisted that we investigate every single corner of every single building that was on the property. And although my ex was less than enthusiastic about it, I insisted. I honestly did not see the point of driving for an hour just to look at the outside of the building. No, I had to go in. The first building we explored was the barn, both upstairs and down. Down in the basement of the barn is where things went from wow to holy crap real fast. The basement had been used as a place for satanic sacrifices. There was satanic artwork all over, a knife that appeared to have blood on it, and an altar with black candles, a bottle of what smelt like blood, and the most disturbing piece of whatever satanic group was using is they had built a makeshift cage out of the silo with chains inside and everything. My boyfriend at the time wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as possible, but I convinced him to stay so that we could explore the rest of the buildings on the property. I told him it was probably a bunch of kids just screwing around and that it was no big deal, right? Wrong. Our next stop was the stables at the back of the property, and honestly, I was so caught up in my love for exploring that he would not have been able to persuade me to leave without going in every single building no matter what. I opened the door to the stable and the smell hit me. Rotting flesh. The entire room was littered with animal corpses, dogs, cats, rabbits, even coyotes and foxes that had been horribly mutilated. It was the worst thing I'd ever laid my eyes on. As soon as my boyfriend saw that, he grabbed me and said that we were leaving right at that moment, and that killing animals is not kids doing stupid things. This is serious. We started leaving, but there was one more building. I wanted to check it out on the way out of the carriage house. He said there was no way we were going there and stomped off up the hill back to the main house, assuming I would follow. But I did not. I went around the hill by myself and took a quick peek into the carriage house. That was anticlimactic. There was absolutely nothing in it. It's actually a good thing that I snuck off like I did, because if I hadn't, we wouldn't have seen them coming. They would have been able to sneak up on us if we weren't coming up the hill and to do God knows what to us. The first one I noticed was an adult male with a baseball bat. He actually had opened our car door and was rifling through our things, trying to find a key, I'm guessing. There were about 8 people in total in the group, ranging from adults in their 30s to teenagers and children of no more than 11 or 12. They all had weapons: golf clubs, sticks, canes, and baseball bats. I yelled at a guy what the hell he was doing going through our car, and my boyfriend came charging over the hill, bless his heart, right through the posse of creepos and weirdos who seemed to be lying in wait for us. It appeared that we had ruined whatever plans they had in mind, because they immediately backed off some and even tried to hide their weapons behind their backs, which is just as stupid if you ask me. Who wouldn't notice a baseball bat on someone's back? And I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing in our car, and he didn't answer. He just looked at me all nervous. My ex-boyfriend said that we were admiring the architecture of the house and that we were just leaving. They let us go and get into our car and drive off, which in itself is a miracle. I say, in light of what we had discovered on the property, they followed us in a black pickup truck with no plates for a good 20 minutes. Instead of heading home, we went to the closest city, which was Bury, filed a report with a policeman who seemed more shaken than us, and headed home. My ex never went back to that roofing job again. He had someone else finish it, and he went to another one. I wanted to go back, but after telling people what happened, I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My ex and I continued various explorations, but we both started carrying weapons. I still carry one to this day, even when I hike. I have not read of anyone else having similar experiences at that castle. Recently, My cousin, who is also an explorer, contacted me with a place she wanted to explore. Guess where and guess what? We've made arrangements to go there in the next couple of weeks. So on that note, many years later, to that castle cult, I hope to never meet you again. And to any other urban explorers out there, please be careful. You never know what you might come across in these abandoned places. My best friend in high school went through this stage of goth girls. I remember one night they took us haunted house exploring in the middle of the night. Now we pulled over on this random in the middle of nowhere road and crawled through this barbed wire fence by moonlight, past the fence over a small hill. I found myself looking at this 2-story and a basement farm home that was surrounded by a huge fountain. It looked like a run-down version of the home in The Great Gatsby. I wish to this day I knew how to get there. I have no idea where it was in my hometown, just that we were there and it was beautifully run down. I was not a believer in the supernatural or ghosts, so I was casually enjoying the home. Inside there were markings on the wall, knocked down doors and walls, and while you can tell it was beautiful at one time, it was really run down. I broke from the group to check out the upstairs, the basement, and the middle floor. As I was walking back to the group, I walked by the stairwell and nodded to one of the girls that was up there with us who was standing in the stairwell. As I entered the next room, I saw our entire group. I paused, then jumped back to the room with the stairwell. No one was there. While creepy, I know what I saw. I know that place has a feel to it. I wish I could find it again. I would go visit it in the dead of night, just to feel what I felt that time. A friend and I were exploring an abandoned hospital, and the way it was set out was via a bunch of joined buildings. All the windows and doors were boarded up, aside from one place where we could squeeze in past a loose board, and the layout meant that once we were in there, we had access to pretty much the entire main building. Obviously, it was darker than dark in there, and we have to remember which wing we'd come in from. We had flashlights, so it wasn't too bad. But then we got to this room, where there was a lot of cool stuff left behind. Beds, filing cabinets, and other things. We wanted to take pictures, so we turned the flashlight off so we could use the flash of the camera. We did this for 10 minutes or so, only seeing the bright flash from the camera. Everything was cool, and then we slowly became aware of noise. Usually an abandoned building is pretty quiet, apart from water dripping and wind doing weird things. But we could hear floors creaking, doors creaking, the occasional scrape or crash of metal against the floor. Basically, it sounded like someone was blundering around in the dark. Now, the layout meant that in order to get back to where we came in, we'd have to walk back towards the noise. There's only one route. We're getting freaked out, so we start moving back through the rooms, stopping to listen all the while. Finally, we get to the side hall that we came in from, and we bolt to the door at the end, finally risking turning the flashlight on and making noise, but it was the wrong door. We stand there listening to the footsteps get closer. We're frozen standing in the dark, totally cornered. If whoever or whatever is making that noise comes down this short hall, we are screwed. We wait and listen, holding our breaths. The scraping and shuffling approaches. Slowly, comes past, and then fades. We wait a bit more, creep out the hall and into the main building again. Carefully, we move one hall over, where we can see a sliver of light from the loose board, and we quietly make our way towards it. Then we hear an almighty scrape and bang behind us, as though someone tipped over one of those huge metal filing cabinets. It was loud. "Time to go," I yell, and we sprint for the door. and there are clear footsteps right behind us. We launch ourselves through the loose board and down the overgrown path. Before taking a quick look back, we can't see through the small gap, but we do not stick around to see if that changes. I grew up in Frederick, Maryland, back in the mid-90s to early 2000s when I was a teenager. The city still had a very Rust Belt vibe. Before its fairly recent revival into a hipster-infected douche mecca, it had a fairly large blue-collar presence, particularly among the city's open-air drainage canal, which back then when I was growing up was flanked on both sides by tons of abandoned and/or condemned buildings, both residential and industrial. Now it's all sushi fashion joints, hilariously overpriced condos, and vintage thrift shops like every other city on the East Coast. Back then, we would roam around the city and break into abandoned buildings for fun. Sometimes we'd vandalize the place, but mostly we were just exploring and would use them as hangout spots where we could drink and smoke without having to worry about cops. There were a bunch of creepy moments, particularly when you'd break into a condemned house only to discover that one or more homeless people had set up there. My city kind of had a reputation for having a lot of severely mentally ill homeless people back then, paranoid schizophrenics and such, a bunch of whom I knew by name. One memory that stands out though was an abandoned house we broke into which had clearly been vacant for many years, with visible black mold growing on the walls. It was weird because it had clearly been occupied by a family previously because all their stuff was still there. Like the rapture happened and they just disappeared. Beds, dresses with clothes, family photos on the walls, all of that. We didn't dare open the fridge. It really seemed like for some reason the family drove away one day and never returned. It was super creepy walking through their home with flashlights and just getting this rotted glimpse into their lives before whatever happened. In March 2011, I took a late-night drive with 3 high school friends. We drove from Modesto, where we all lived, to Knights Ferry, about 27 miles east. Knights Ferry is a tiny little village in the foothills where the Central Valley meets the Sierra Nevadas. We arrived at around 11 p.m. and found the place eerily desolate. The purpose of the outing was just for the drive itself, so we weren't surprised. But we did get sort of creeped out. It's cliche, but the place itself was a total ghost town. There aren't even street lights, so there are just dark, shut-up buildings along the main street. But a full moon was shining overhead and illuminated everything. We parked at the end of Main Street near an abandoned mill from the 19th century. The driver, my friend Freddie, and I decided to get out and get a better view of the open sky and take in the quiet night. Our other 2 friends, Jack and Chris, stayed in the car. They were freaked out by the dark, quiet and isolated setting. The road is a bit elevated above the mill and the adjacent recreation area along the Stanislaus River. Freddie and I walked to the edge of the road when we reached the waist-height wooden guardrail, and we saw 2 figures standing below, probably 30 to 40 feet away near the main building. These figures were featureless and solid grey. It was as if they were wearing those skin-tight colour bodysuits that they sell at costume stores. They had no face, no identifiable marks, and appeared to have no clothes on, no genitalia or breasts, no hair, nothing. Just a head, torso, arms and legs, and about the size of an average human adult. I can't attribute their lack of features to darkness, because the moon was so brightly shining down on them. They were completely exposed in a clearing with no shadows obscuring them. We could see them plain as day, and they almost seemed like they were slightly glowing. I don't know if that was just an illusion from their light color reflecting moonlight, or if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but just as we laid eyes on them, they turned towards us like they had been in conversation but then noticed our presence. The same time we had noticed them. Even though they had no eyes or face, we could tell they were looking at us. We looked back at them for what was at least 4 seconds, before Freddie and I looked at each other in horror and both instinctively turned and ran back to the car. We jumped in and peeled out of there, scaring our friends in the process. From their position in the car, they were unable to see the figures. Freddie and I recalled to them what we had seen, and we sped out to town. When comparing notes, we realized they had identical descriptions. We both saw the same physical characteristics, movements, and strange glow. We debated back and forth for a long time, trying to rationalize what they were, but could never feel totally convinced by any sort of conclusions. I later fell into an internet rabbit hole about paranormal investigations and experiences, and found posts from people who had seen UFOs over Knight's Ferry over the years. So now I lovingly refer to this experience as my first alien encounter. I don't know if that's what we saw, and there's no way to ever know, but I'm okay with that. But I won't be driving to Knight's Ferry after dark alone anymore. One night, 4 friends and myself decided to explore a large, supposedly haunted park that led to an abandoned neighborhood that would soon be an addition to the park, creating longer biking/running trails. We had hid out in this part till about midnight because the place closes at 10 and park rangers scout the whole area. In order to get to where we had to be, we all needed bikes and flashlights, so after waiting for a while, we took off. I had a large and very bright flashlight, so I rode behind everyone else, mainly because my girlfriend at the time, Sarah, wasn't an excellent bike rider and was falling behind. We went far into this park down a trail until it ended, and we had to get off our bikes, then walk until we hit an abandoned road that was soon going to be turned into a paved road. We reached the abandoned neighborhood that was as creepy as we thought it'd be. It was 1 a.m. and being an eerily quiet street with greenery growing over beaten down houses just gave off a creepy vibe. After taking pictures and failing to really see anything worth noting, we decided to make our way back. Now, on the way back, a bridge we crossed earlier was not completely finished, heading back to where we came. There was a wide opening to go down to the bridge, and a curb to hop on, because it was not paved onto the abandoned road. So my girlfriend Sarah did not see the curb to hop onto and hit it, stumbling off her bike. I was behind her holding the big flashlight and almost fell off myself. When I caught myself, I ended up shining the light straight down the bottom of the bridge. Suddenly, I see an extremely pale girl with red hair wearing a dirtied white dress sprinting under the bridge. However, I only got a look at her side. Nope, no way, was the next thing Sarah yelled, riding her bike all the way to the other side of the bridge. She was pretty frantic, but I wanted to make sure she had seen what I had seen. She described it perfectly. I thought maybe it was some girl in trouble, and maybe we should check it out and see if she needed help. She grabbed my arm and stopped me, telling me and another friend not to go down. When she saw where I shined my light, Sarah was able to see the girl's face, and she looked down at the girl's blank white eyes while they were staring back at her before she sprinted away. We have no idea if it was truly paranormal, and she hates it when I bring it up. This happened about 7 years ago, but still really freaks me out. My hometown has a canyon that is rumored to be haunted. The story is that a woman lost her husband in a mining accident, and she haunts the canyon searching for him. In this same canyon there exists a building, very much off the main trail, called the Devil's Playhouse, because it's said to be the place where devil worshippers go on satanic holidays in order to do their rituals and whatnot. I was a wannabe ghost hunter, and spent a lot of the time in that canyon, specifically drawn to the playhouse. It was an old factory with a lot of mysterious writing on the walls and holes into rooms that had no entrance. To get to the factory, you had to drive way off trail on a very beaten up dirt road, and just after the house there was a fence. As daring as I was, I always turned around at that fence, so I could get out of there easily if I got scared. From there you had to climb in and out of a deep ditch to actually get to the playhouse. Now that the description is out of the way, here's what happened that caused me to never go there again. I had brought my younger sister and 2 younger cousins up there. We were messing around taking pictures when my little sister swore she saw a camera pointed towards us from the rocks outside the window of the warehouse. I didn't really see it, but my sister was really freaking out. We decided to take a break from the playhouse, and I walked about 100 feet to a bunch of large stone fixtures. Now, I had been up that canyon many times, and rarely did I see another car, especially at the Devil's Playhouse. But suddenly a truck made it way along the trail. When the driver caught sight of us, he slowed down to 5 miles an hour, and the passenger was very noticeably pointing a camera our way. They then proceeded to drive past my car, then back up to where we were bumper to bumper. I really thought they were going to tow my car or something. They left their truck on, and then 2 men stepped out and climbed through the ditch. They walked around the far side of the playhouse from us, and my sister pointed out it was the side the camera was on. I was the adult in this situation, so I was coming up with any reason to give these guys as to why we were there just in case we were trespassing. We had walked back to the house to get to the only safe part of the ditch as we approached. The men stepped out. They were probably mid-30s or so. They didn't say a word, they didn't smile, they just stood there, and we had to walk right past them with no emotion on their face at all. We made it to my car and drove off a bit. I just had a really sick feeling in my stomach. They were hiding something up there. I decided to walk at the base of the entrance of the trail to the playhouse and just wait for them to come back down. It was stupid, I know. Another car pulled up beside us, and the old man who was driving it stared at us. He was seriously creepy looking, and it scared the crap out of us, so I drove back down to town. The car followed. He even parked at the gas station we were going to. We had gone inside, and he sat in the parking lot for a good 20 minutes before leaving. I'm still not entirely sure what happened or why, but strange men hiding something in the Devil's Playhouse. Let's not meet. My hometown is in the middle of farming lands and cattle ranches for miles in every direction. While it's not nature, it is a lot of open spaces and old-ass farmhouses. So, the middle of nowhere. There was one that was notorious for being spooky, about 35 miles out in the middle of nowhere. My friends and I decide to drive out to it one evening and see if we can get inside and look around, ignoring the potential of danger, as dumb teenage boys do. My friends Jake and Justin and Matt stay in the car because they're too scared to follow inside. My stepbrother, our best friend, and I climb in a window on the lower floor and look around inside. There's lots of beer cans, needles, animal bones, and there had obviously been a fire in the house in the past. Nothing too spooky. Just the normal stuff you'd expect to see in a janky old farmhouse. Then my phone rings. "Yo," I said to Justin. "Dude, where are you guys right now?" In the house?" "Yeah." The back porch sun decking thing? Why?" "All of you?" "Yeah, why?" "Because someone is standing on the porch looking directly at our car." "What? Dude, shut up." "Dude, are you standing on the porch right now or just messing with me?" "No, dude, you saw us. We went through the window and we all went through the back." "Yeah, I saw that. But then I thought one of you came out through the door because some dude has just appeared in front of the door. They're walking around the side of the house back to you right now. Hold on. Dude, don't. As the three of us round the side of the house, clear as crystal, we all saw what they saw. An inky black-like light type, dark in the shape of a human thing, just stand in front of the porch. This was the middle of a farm, in the middle of nowhere, with no streetlights, just moon and stars and the faint glow of a city way off in the distance. And yet, I could still make out a very obvious humanoid-type figure, because of how much blacker it was in contrast to the rest of the surrounds. Although it had no eyes or face that I could discern, I could swear it was looking directly at me with it's time you left kind of energy. Not overly hostile. It's time you left. Now. We took off in a dead sprint back to the car, and we booked it out of there. We went to Denny's where it's safe. I asked everyone what they felt when they saw it, and they all said they felt it when it was looking directly at them. Justin and Matt said they felt like the darkness was telling them that if they had to wait any longer, they were going to be in physical danger. Jake said he felt like it was a demon near him, as he's religious. My best friend said he felt unbelievably sad, and he had to leave right now to get away from it. He's not an emotional guy, so that was shocking, and my stepbrother and I were the only ones who said we didn't feel any anger or hostility. It was just a very stern order to leave immediately. 2 weeks later, the property burnt to the ground. I grew up in the country. I'm not talking middle of nowhere, but it was definitely a step down from the suburbs. For context, my house is next to a massive cornfield, but the house on the other side and across the street was somewhat close. I also lived on a 7-acre lot, so it was somewhere between rural country and the suburbs. Anyway, at the back of the property was a pretty large forest that eventually led into a nature trail. But before that, there used to be a campground. This campground used to be a pretty popular place back in the day, long before we moved there. But it eventually abruptly closed. I don't know why exactly, but I've heard a lot of talk about there being issues with drugs. There was also a rumor that people had been attacked there. No one that we know of in that area really knew for sure, but the fact remained that it was closed, and they didn't tear it down. They just left the camp abandoned, complete with cabins, a mess hall, other buildings, and a swimming pool. That in itself sounds creepy, and it was, but at the time of this story, I was very young, probably around 7 or 8, and I was also pretty naive given my age. Now, this forest, an abandoned camp, wasn't part of our property, which ends just where you get to the tree line. However, at the time, the owner of that property and my dad were friendly with each other, and this guy said he didn't mind if we went back there and even let my dad hunt there during deer season. So, one evening when my mum was working nights, my dad took my sister, who's less than a year younger than I am, and me back there to explore. It wasn't dark yet as it was summer, but it was getting close by the time we headed there. We explored a bit, though most of the buildings were locked, and the pool was gross. There was also a lot of spiders around. I was getting eager to return, and it was also pretty dusky by the time we explored the cabins. They were all unlocked, and some didn't even have doors, so we were looking around. In hindsight, this sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, but I didn't know any better at the time, and my dad is basically fearless. While we were in one of the cabins, we heard voices outside it, and we peeked out one of the windows and saw 2 20-30-something-year-old guys. They kind of looked rough and shifty, and they were all speaking loudly. They seemed like they were in some kind of rush, like they had to hurry up and do something back there, or they were looking for something. Now, I had rarely seen my dad truly scared, and while I wouldn't say he was exactly scared in this situation, I could tell he was uneasy, which was very unusual for him. He stood in the doorway of the cabin while my sister and I looked out the window. I was holding this loose brick I had picked up, and my dad told me to keep hold of it unless he told me to drop it, which for some reason sticks out to me. While watching through the window, I see one of these guys look towards the cabin and make eye contact with my dad, and they just stared at each other for a bit. It seemed like forever at the time, but it probably wasn't that long. At this point I was unsettled. It was the brick comment that my dad made that made me realize this was a potentially dangerous situation. The guy then whispered something to the other guy, who looked at my dad as well. They just kind of had this silent standoff. Finally, the two guys walked away into the trees, and once he couldn't see them anymore, he ushered us out. We headed back to my house, but my dad seemed uneasy still and kept looking behind us. We made it back with no problems, and nothing ever came of this encounter. My dad, years later, told me that neither of the people that day were the owner, though I suppose they too could have been there with permission. But he had a bad feeling, which I already knew even back then, because he asked us not to tell my mum. Like I said, nothing ever came of it, and perhaps there really is a perfectly reasonable explanation. Even so, it creeped us out, especially given the tumultuous history of this abandoned camp. My dad never took us to the woods after that, at least not to the campground, though I still did hunt back there. All these years later, and I'm still too uneasy to return. I'm in my first year of college and I'm a medium-sized dude. My town is in the middle of the mountains, with about 9,000 people in them. Each neighborhood starts at the feet of a mountain and goes all the way up to the top. The mountain I live in is called the Bull's Jump, since there's a story of a bull not being able to climb it all the way pulling carriages. It's very steep and therefore is one of the neighborhoods with less people. About 30 minutes going up on it, you reach a road made of gravel with a sign on it that says dead end and private property stay away. 10 minutes on that gravel road and you see an abandoned house, and 5 minutes after that is my house. From my house you can see all the way to the entrance of the gravel road. It's faint, but if it's night, you can clearly see the lights of a car. Once you enter the gravel road, there's no way to turn around until you reach my house. So if we see lights, we know for sure someone's approaching. The surroundings of my road and house are fruit trees and woods, making it very thick and difficult to walk through. I'd say impossible. I had some guests coming over. I was preparing a bonfire, snacks and drinks in front of the abandoned house 5 minutes from my home. The appeal of partying here was making scary stories, seeing the stars, and pretty much party without rules since it was so secluded. This party was supposed to be a future nostalgic memory, and I had everything set up perfectly. It was around 9 p.m. and I see the first lights of a car approaching. I get excited. I'm very disappointed to see only 2 members of the group. This boring guy and his crush. His crush is kind of important to the story, so here we go. It was a girl who made a big deal out of everything. We were victims of a Ouija game prank that went a little bit too far and she got messed up. She was mentally unstable, and since the prank, she would speak to ghosts and all that kind of crap. I do feel sorry for her now, but at that time, I just considered her creepy and annoying. I offered drinks and snacks but didn't light the bonfire since I wanted the whole group to be here to light it up together. They parked at my house and we walked to the abandoned house to wait for the rest of them. As soon as we start a conversation, the girl claims she saw someone inside the abandoned house. I get annoyed, but I go inside and check every corner and yell, "Clear," every now and then. This abandoned house was my spot to talk on the phone with my crush, so I never saw it as scary, but the girl did make me wary and uneasy with her fears. Looking back, I think she was a bit horrified of the fact of being in the middle of nowhere with a guy she knew was in love with her and me, a guy that lives in the middle of nowhere. So my heart rate was off and the night felt strange already. A new set of lights appeared and I couldn't be happier. There was a bunch of my friends that I hadn't seen since high school, and I can't wait to tell them all my college stories. As the lights approached, I jump in front of a car waving my arms, and the car stops completely. I don't recognize the car, and I'm thinking I've scared some stranger who's got lost. So I approach the driver's window in a slow, non-threatening pace while I raise my hands. I'm sorry. There's a shirtless fat guy of around 40 in a really broken down car looking at me confused. What are you doing here? I live here, we're just drinking. You live here? Pointing to the abandoned house, the guy goes. No sir, I live 5 minutes down the road. It's the only place you can U-turn easily. You just have to keep going. I was just trying to be nice as hell at this point. The guy stays silent for a second. I notice he's absolutely focused on my two friends in the dark. I looked back at them and saw my guy friend retreating slowly while the girl was trying to hide in the tall grass behind him. He then went on to say, "Have you seen a white pickup truck throwing people around here?" I think for a second at this point, and I understand I'm in danger. My friends picked up on it faster and are out of the way of danger already going down the hill that leads to my house, and I take a step back. "What do you want?" "What do you mean?" the guy says. "Yeah, I can't help you, man." I turn around and walk away. I hear the guy open the door of the car and walk on the gravel behind me, but I don't turn around. I close my eyes and wait for my end. I walk around 20 feet and I hear footsteps on grass. I turn around and see the guy using a flip phone looking around the grass. The grass is about 1 meter tall, and this guy is not much taller. It was impossible to find something smaller than a woman's purse. I reach my house and find my friends crying. I tell them everything is okay and that the guy was just lost. We go inside the house and close everything to feel a bit more safe. And this is when we see another set of lights approaching, and I almost have a heart attack. There were more of my friends coming and it wasn't safe. The fat guy was still trying to find something, and I wake up my parents so my friends feel okay and head out running. I didn't know what my hopes were. I stand about 20 meters away from the abandoned house and see a white pickup truck and the mysterious car. I see no less than 4 figures moving around the cars, and I hear some grunts and heavy stomping. Nothing makes sense, so I crouch on the grass, barely even breathing. After 10 minutes, both cars somehow U-turn their cars and leave, which makes me think they'd done this before, since there's a very hidden and challenging way in order to do this. They leave some empty brown paper bags behind, bigger than the ones you get at fast food, and they destroyed my bonfire and took our drinks and food. I called my friends to tell them to stay away, but they were already at the gravel road and approaching. I'm so afraid that I can't even be happy to see my friends, and the first thing we do is talk about what happened. I didn't hear anything, but the traumatized girl said that she heard a woman asking for help. I just heard what seemed like a group of people silently arguing on who get to keep something. My other friend and my parents heard absolutely nothing. We partied that night with our eyes peeled and no bonfire. Nobody made scary stories, no pulled any scary pranks, for once. I think the traumatized girl in our group made this totally worse, but sometimes wonder if she was onto something. People perhaps hiding in the abandoned house and were calling for help. I did know some dealers in town, and they told me that there were much better spots to do their business around town than there. Some of them thought that someone was taking care of someone else and throwing them where they'd never be found. After 10 years, I still wonder what that was all about. Nothing has ever been found there. It must not have been super bad, because otherwise I wouldn't be alive. What in the hell was that all about? I really wonder, and I guess I'll never know. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I personally have never been urban exploring, but it is something that I would like to do in future. It does sound really cool, especially when you discover something that no one's ever found before, like the house that was just abandoned with stuff left inside. A glimpse in time as to how people used to live, what they used to be like, and the questions that it leaves you with. Why would they leave without any of their things? It's always puzzled me. In any case, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my amazing patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to join me on Patreon for a small amount of money every month and frequent rewards for signing up, feel free to check out my Patreon. The link, of course, is in the description, and it is very much appreciated. Thanks, guys. Like I said to you before, I do have an ongoing competition. We're trying to hit 4,000 Twitter and Instagram followers, so feel free to follow me over there, and we'll be doing a giveaway soon, once we reach on both. And it would really mean a lot to me. If something spooky or scary has ever happened to you, feel free to reach out to me, share your story, those links are in the description too. But for now, guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay safe out there, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.